I drove through a red light that night, 3 of them actually. I didn't even notice until later when my daughter pointed it out from the passenger seat, her voice shaking as badly as my hands on the wheel. She'd called me 20 minutes earlier, barely coherent, saying something about the parking garage at St. Laurent Shopping Center, saying my son-in-law's name, saying, "Please come, Dad, please come now." That was all I needed. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as structural engineer in Ottawa, inspecting bridges, signing off on load-bearing walls, making calm decisions under pressure. I thought I knew how to keep my head when things went sideways. But when I pulled into that parking garage on a Wednesday night in February and saw my daughter crouched beside her husband on the concrete floor, his face the color of old ash, one arm bent at an angle that made my stomach drop, every year of professional composure evaporated in about 4 seconds flat. His name was Theo. Theodore Ashworth III, yet he wanted his full name on paper, which his family always did. My daughter Vivian had married him 2 years earlier at a vineyard outside Niagara-on-the-Lake, on a September afternoon so beautiful it almost hurt to look at. I'd walked her down the aisle and shaken Theo's hand and genuinely meant it when I told him to take care of her. He was charming back then, attentive. The kind of young man who remembered to hold doors open and ask questions and look you in the eye when he talked to you. I should have paid more attention to who taught him those manners and why. He was alive when I got to him. Breathing, but shallow. There was blood on the side of his head and his lips kept moving like he was trying to say something he couldn't quite get out. I knelt down in that cold concrete and I took his hand and I said, Theo, I'm here. Can you hear me? His eyes found mine. He squeezed my fingers once, hard. Who did this? I asked. Can you tell me? He turned his head toward Vivian. Just barely. And then he said 4 words. So quiet I had to lean in to hear them. It was my father. Then he was gone. Not dead, thank God, but unconscious. The ambulance arrived 6 minutes later. I know, because I counted every one of those minutes standing in that garage, holding my daughter while she shook, staring at those 4 words and turning them over in my mind like a stone with something living underneath it. My wife Lorraine met us at the Ottawa General. She'd driven in from Kanata in record time, still wearing the cardigan she put on for watching television after dinner. And when she saw Vivian's face in the waiting room, she pulled our daughter into her arms and didn't say anything at all for a long time. That's always been Lorraine's gift. She knows when words are the wrong tool. Theo was in surgery for 4 hours. Fractured orbital socket, 2 broken ribs, a mild bleed on the brain that the neurosurgeon called manageable, in the tone of someone who'd said that word so many times it had stopped meaning anything terrifying. He would recover. It would take time, but he would recover. The police took a statement from Vivian in a small room near the nursing station. I sat beside her. She told them what she knew, which wasn't much. She'd been waiting for Theo to meet her at the car after his dinner with his father, and when he didn't show, she went looking and found him near the stairwell on level 2. No witnesses. No security cameras covering that corner. Whoever had done it knew the garage. The officer, a young woman, maybe 30, with the particular careful neutrality of someone trained to hear terrible things without reacting, wrote everything down and said they'd be in touch. After she left, I sat with Vivian and I asked her quietly, "Do you believe him? That it was his father?" She looked at her hands for a long time. "Yes," she said. "I've believed it for a while. I just didn't want to say it out loud. I need to tell you about Clifton Ashworth, because you can't understand what came next without understanding what kind of man he was. He'd built his money in commercial real estate, shopping centers, mixed-use developments, the kind of properties that anchor small Ontario cities. Belleville, Brockville, Pembroke, nothing flashy, nothing downtown Toronto, but solid and profitable and accumulated over 40 years of buying low and pressuring the right people. He had a foundation with his name on it. He sat on 2 hospital boards. He gave speeches at charity dinners about the importance of community investment, and he said it with the face of a man who believed it completely, which is the most dangerous kind of person there is. He had never, not once in 2 years, accepted that his son had married Vivienne. Not because she wasn't remarkable. She is. She has a master's degree in urban planning from Carleton. She runs marathons. She volunteers at a youth literacy program in Barnier on Saturday mornings. She is, by any reasonable measure, a far better person than most of us manage to be. But her grandfather came to Canada from Trinidad in 1965, and her mother is Métis. And in Clifton Ashworth's internal accounting, That meant she was not the kind of woman his son was supposed to bring to the family table. He never said this directly. He was far too careful for that. But it came through in 100 small ways. The comments he made about different backgrounds and adjustment periods. The way he spoke to Vivian at family dinners like she was a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The time he pulled Theo aside at Christmas and told him, in terms Theo later recounted to Vivian with his eyes on the floor, that a man in his position needed a partner who could move in the same circles. Vivian had told me some of this. Not all of it. She protected me from the worst of it, I think. Because she knew what it would do to me. I'm not a man who gets angry easily. But the anger I feel at the idea of someone treating my daughter as less than she is, that particular anger doesn't dissipate. It just goes underground and waits. And now here we were. Theo's recovery was slow. He was in hospital for 11 days, and when he came home, it was to a house in Bad Haven, not to the condo he and Vivian shared near the Dave. Vivian had decided that quietly and with no fanfare, and I didn't question it. We set up the guest room. Lorraine made soup. I drove Theo to his follow-up appointments and we talked, carefully at first, about what had happened. It took about a week before he told me everything. He and his father had met for dinner at Riviera on Wellington Street, a restaurant Clifton favored for difficult conversations, Theo said, because the ambient noise made it hard to be overheard. Clifton had been building towards something for months, Theo now realized. Small pressures, questions about the marriage, suggestions that the condo should be put in Theo's name only, for tax purposes. An offer to refinance Theo's investment portfolio through a private firm Clifton controlled, which Theo had declined. That night at dinner, Clifton had put a document on the table, a separation agreement, pre-drafted, with a financial settlement for Vivian that Theo described as insultingly small. He told Theo to have his wife sign it within 30 days or he would pull Theo's access to the family trust, approximately $2.3 million, and restructure it so that Theo's younger brother inherited everything. Theo had told him no. He'd said it clearly, Theo told me. He'd pushed the document back across the table and said that Vivian was his wife, that he loved her, and that he was not going to sign anything or ask her to sign anything. And if his father wanted to disinherit him over it, then that was his father's choice to make. He said Clifton had smiled. That was the part that stayed with him. The smile. They'd left the restaurant separately. Theo had gone to get the car. He never made it out of the garage. I am not a man who acts on rage. I've learned over 63 years that rage makes you sloppy, and that sloppy decisions cost you more than the original injury. So I did not get in my car and drive to Clifton Ashworth's house in Rockcliffe Park. I did not call him. I did not do any of the things that every cell in my body was screaming at me to do. Instead, I called my friend Walter. Walter Bream spent 28 years with the RCMP before retiring to a small house in Perth. We'd been friends since we were both on the same recreational hockey team in the 1990s. Terrible players, good company. He had the kind of quiet competence that doesn't announce itself. And he knew people in every corner of the legal and law enforcement world in this province. I'd called on him twice in my professional life for advice. I trusted him completely. I drove out to Perth on a Saturday morning and sat at his kitchen table and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he poured more coffee and looked out at his backyard for a while, at the frozen creek and the bare birch trees. The assault charge is possible, he said finally, but without witnesses and without the camera footage, and with Theo unwilling to name him publicly yet, it's going to be slow. Clifton will have lawyers who make slow look like a career. I know, I said, but there's something else here. He set down his mug. You said he controls a private firm that he wanted Theo to refinance through. What do you know about that? I didn't know much, but Theo did. Over the following 3 weeks, in the evenings after dinner, while Lorraine and Vivian watched television in the living room, Theo and I sat at the kitchen table and he told me everything he knew about his father's business. He knew a great deal. He'd been groomed since childhood to eventually take over parts of it, and that meant he'd been shown things, explained things, brought into conversations that a man like Clifton would never have allowed otherwise. Some of what Theo described was aggressive but probably legal. Some of it was not. There were properties in Renfrew County that had been transferred between numbered companies in ways designed to obscure beneficial ownership. Theo had seen the corporate structures laid out on a whiteboard in his father's office when he was 24. Being taught how the tax planning worked. There were payments to a municipal councillor in a small city outside of Kingston that Clifton called consulting fees. but that had corresponded twice with zoning decisions that increased the value of his properties by several $1 million. And there was the private investment firm, registered in Alberta, managed through a nominee director in Calgary, that had pooled money from at least a dozen investors who believed they were getting returns from real estate income and were instead, as far as Theo could tell, being paid from new investor capital. I'm an engineer, not a lawyer, but I knew enough to know that the last item on that list was serious. Walter confirmed it when I called him. If that's what it is, he said carefully, that's a securities matter, and securities regulators do not play slow. He connected me with a woman named Patricia, a former OSC investigator who now ran her own compliance consultancy in Toronto. I drove down on a Tuesday, sat in her office on King Street West with a document Theo had written out. Every detail he could remember, dates and amounts and names. And I watched her read through it twice without expression. When she finished, she looked up at me. How confident is your son-in-law in this information? He lived inside it, I said. He's confident. She nodded once. Then you should know that what you brought me is enough to open a formal referral. These things move carefully, and they move slowly at first, and then they don't. I want to tell you that the next part felt satisfying in some clean cinematic way. It didn't. It felt like waiting. It felt like watching my daughter eat breakfast every morning and seeing the effort it took her to act like she was fine, and knowing I couldn't tell her exactly what was in motion because I didn't want to give her hope I couldn't guarantee. It felt like driving Theo to his cognitive rehab appointments twice a week and sitting in the waiting room reading magazines I wasn't reading. Thinking about a man in Rockcliffe Park who had probably not lost a single hour of sleep. Clifton reached out once, about 5 weeks after the assault, not to me, to Vivian. A handwritten note delivered through a courier expressing his concern for Theo's recovery and his hope that the family could find a path forward. There was no mention of the document. No mention of the garage. Just the smooth, practiced language of a man who had spent decades making his intentions deniable. Vivian read it twice, set it on the kitchen counter, and went upstairs. I turned it over in my hands. The stationery was heavy cotton rag, the kind you order from a specialty printer, his foundation's letterhead, discreetly embossed at the top. I thought about the smile Theo had described, the one at the restaurant when Theo pushed the document back. I put the note in a folder and added it to the file I was keeping. The investigation moved in a way I was not allowed to know much about, which was deliberate and correct. Patricia was clear with me. I had made a referral. I was not a party to the investigation, and the best thing I could do was stay quiet and let the process work. Walter said the same thing. I'm good at following expert advice when I trust the experts, and I trusted both of them. So I stayed quiet. What I do know, because it eventually became public, is this. In late spring, the Ontario Securities Commission, in coordination with the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit, executed search warrants on 3 properties associated with Clifton Ashworth's numbered companies, including his office on Spark Street. His personal accounts were frozen pending the investigation. 3 of his properties were placed under court orders preventing their sale or transfer, and a municipal councillor in a city outside Kingston resigned suddenly, citing personal reasons approximately 2 weeks later. Clifton Ashworth was not arrested that day. These things don't work the way they do on television, but his lawyers were in court within 48 hours trying to lift the asset freeze, and they failed, and that failure was reported in the Ottawa Citizen in 4 paragraphs on page A8. And I read those 4 paragraphs sitting at my kitchen table with my morning coffee, and I read them again. And then I sat quietly for a while. Lorraine came in and looked at my face and didn't ask. She just put her hand on my shoulder and left it there. Vivian and Theo moved back to their condo in the Deep at the end of June. Theo had been cleared by his neurosurgeon and had gone back to work part-time at the architectural firm where he'd been a junior partner before all of this. He looked older than he had a year ago, not worse. Older in a particular way, like a man who has decided something and is at peace with the decision. He and Vivian walked to the Widow Canal on Sunday mornings now. She told me that like it was ordinary information, and I'd kept it to myself how much it meant to me. One evening in July, Theo came over for dinner. After Lorraine and Vivian had gone out to the backyard with their wine, he and I did the dishes together the way we sometimes did, me washing and him drying. And he said without looking up from the plate in his hands, I've been talking to a lawyer about formally separating from the trust, even if the freeze gets lifted eventually. I don't want it. I kept washing. That sounds like the right decision, I said. It feels like it. He set the plate down. I wanted to tell you that I know what you did. I know you could have gone at him directly and didn't. I know you were patient when that must have been almost impossible. I handed him the next plate. You're my family, I said. That's the whole story. He nodded. We finished the dishes in comfortable quiet. The formal charges came in October: securities fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and 2 counts related to the payments to the counselor, the legal description of which I won't pretend to fully understand, but which Walter told me carried serious weight. Clifton Ashworth's photograph appeared in the Ottawa Citizen and on the CBC Ottawa website, the careful expression of a man who had rehearsed this moment with his lawyers. His foundation announced it was suspending operations pending legal review. One of his hospital boards asked for his resignation. The other waited a week and then asked for the same thing. His lawyer issued a statement saying the charges were without merit and that his client looked forward to a full vindication in court. I've heard that sentence before. Everyone has. The assault case against him for what happened to Theo in the parking garage was still open. Proceeding carefully, Walter told me, building alongside the financial case. These things take time. I've made my peace with time. There is a line I keep coming back to. Something my own father said to me when I was young and furious about some injustice I can no longer remember the specifics of. He said, the thing about people who believe their money makes them untouchable is that they stop watching for the ordinary people. He meant it as a caution about arrogance. I've spent a lot of this year thinking about it as something else, as a description of the one real advantage that people like us have over people like Clifton Ashworth. He had never, in 40 years of accumulation, learned to take us seriously. That was his mistake, not mine. Vivian called me on a Thursday morning in November. Her voice different from any version of it I'd heard in the past year. Lighter. Somehow, like something that had been pressing on her chest had finally lifted. She said Theo had something to tell me. He got on the line and cleared his throat the way he does when he's trying not to show that he's feeling something. We're expecting a baby, he said. June. Lorraine already knows. Vivian called her first. Don't be offended. I laughed. It came out louder than I expected, bouncing off the kitchen walls, and I sat down at the table because my legs felt suddenly unreliable in the way that only very good news can cause. June. The same month, I had sat in this kitchen reading 4 paragraphs on page A8 and feeling the first loosening of something that had been wound tight for months. I thought about my father-in-law, who came to this country in 1971 with a mechanical engineering degree that no one here would recognize and spent 10 years doing work far beneath him before anyone gave him a fair chance. I thought about Lorraine's mother, who spoke Michif and English and French and navigated worlds that were not built for her, with a grace I have never stopped admiring. I thought about what it means to hand something forward to the next generation. Not money, not property, but the knowledge that the people who love them will not sit quietly when someone decides they are worth less. I told Theo that was the best news I'd heard in a long time, and I meant every word. I still think about that parking garage sometimes. The way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the cold coming up through the concrete on my knees, and Theo's hand squeezing mine before he lost consciousness. People talk about moments that change you like they arrive with some kind of announcement. They don't. They just happen. And then you're different. And the only question is what you do with that. What I've come to understand, and it took most of this past year to fully understand it, is that Clifton Ashworth didn't lose because I was stronger than him, or richer than him, or better connected. He lost because he'd spent 40 years making choices that chipped away at the person he might have been. Every backroom payment, every manipulated zoning approval, every time he looked at his son's wife and decided her family story didn't count. Those weren't just legal risks. They were decisions about character. And character, I found, compounds the same way debt does. Quietly, and then all at once. Theo made a different kind of choice. The night he pushed that document back across the table at Riviera, he was 29 years old, sitting across from a man who controlled his financial future, and he said no. Not loudly, not dramatically. He just said no and meant it, and stood up and walked out. That took something I want to name properly. It took the kind of courage that isn't about not being afraid. He told me later he was terrified, but about deciding that some things matter more than safety. That's not a lesson anyone can hand you. You have to arrive at it yourself. And Vivian, I watched my daughter carry this weight for 2 years without letting it break her Saturday mornings at the literacy program. Her runs along the canal path. Her careful, steady kindness toward a husband who was slowly figuring out who he was outside his family's money. She didn't do that because it was easy. She did because she decided what kind of person she was going to be, and she held to it even when holding to it cost her something real. That kind of integrity, the kind that doesn't require an audience, is rarer than people think. I brought Walter the facts. I brought Patricia the documents. I let people who knew more than I did do what they were trained to do. That wasn't passivity. It was the discipline of knowing the difference between what I could fix with my hands and what required patience and precision. I've been an engineer long enough to know that the strongest structures are the ones that distribute their load correctly. The same is true, I think, of the difficult moments in a life. My grandchild will be born in June. They'll grow up knowing their parents chose each other clearly and defended that choice when it cost them something. They'll grow up in a family where the people who love them don't quietly accept being told they are worth less. I can't think of a better thing to pass forward than that. The ice is off the Rideau Canal now. Some mornings when I drive past it on the way to an early appointment, I see people already out walking. Ordinary people, going about ordinary mornings, in a city that has more underneath its surface than most people stop to notice. I think about my father-in-law arriving here with a degree no one would honor, and Lorraine's mother navigating worlds that weren't built for her, and I think they kept going anyway. They kept their heads up and their judgment intact, and they kept going. That's the whole inheritance, right there.